Alrighty, hello everybody. Welcome to the distribution team demo on June 10, 2021. This week I'm going to be talking about SSH support for the GitLab operator. So I'm going to do a quick demo of what that looks like and then lead into a discussion about the alternatives and the approach that we have for the solution. I'll share my screen. Alrighty, everybody see my screen? Cool. Alrighty, so this is the issue, number 58. If you're curious, I have it linked in the distribution team demo notes. There's good discussion on here. Where this has led is MR 163, and the approach in this one I'm going to be taking is to deploy the forked Nginx objects that we've built into our GitLab Helm chart. And so the idea behind this being with the operator that we currently deploy with the GitLab operator, it approaches SSH support in a slightly different way. It has some custom resources that it uses to define TCP traffic. And those custom resources are actually defined as feature preview, not necessarily recommended for production. And even if you do deploy those, which I've tested, I noticed that you actually still have to manually expose port 22 on the Nginx service. There doesn't seem to be a way to do that in the Nginx ingress controller custom resource. So my fear with that is that the process for an end user who wants SSH support, which currently comes out of the box with the Helm charts, would require some manual intervention with several steps for a user if they wanted to do the same thing in the operator. And ideally, I would like to avoid the operator becoming a more involved process than our Helm charts. And so the approach in this MR kind of works around that because we've taken that logic that connects all the SSH traffic for GitLab and built it into our fork of the Nginx chart. And so effectively all I have to do in this MR is deploy those Nginx objects, including the TCP config map from GitLab shell. And so to show you briefly what this looks like, we've demoed the operator a few times, so I'll skip to the part where it's already deployed. I will show you my GitLab custom resource. So the interesting part is down here under spec, we've got global host domain pointed to my domain. I only picked an external IP just so I didn't have to keep mapping them every time my service got a new IP. And then I disabled configure cert manager because just no need for this specific MR to hit let's encrypt too often. And then I went Nginx ingress enabled true. I'm working around a small issue, but this should be the default. Of course, that's up for discussion if we want this to be the default or if we want the Nginx ingress operator to be the default. But that's really all a user would need to do. And then you can see here, if I list the pods, we've got the Nginx ingress controller and the default backend. This looks exactly like what we had from the Helm charts because it is. And so, and then the last thing to check here is the services. So here's the Nginx ingress controller service. And you can see over here on the right that there's a port exposed automatically for GitLab shell, port 22. So I have an instance up here running already. I already added my public key for SSH. And so I just kind of grabbed the link for the default monitoring project and I'll clone it. You can see it's over SSH git at gitlab.apps. Didn't have to specify a port or anything. And then if I cd into it, I'll edit the readme. I from the demo. Give it a message and push it up. So no errors. And if I refresh, there's my message. So exactly how you would expect it to work in another installation of the GitLab Helm charts. Now, what I left some notes here regarding in the demo notes is kind of what I started leading into earlier. Now, the downsides of this approach that I've deployed here is that at the moment, there's no Red Hat certified images for the flavor of Ingress Nginx that we're deploying. That was one of the points I didn't mention at the beginning of the call. With the Helm charts, we actually deploy the Kubernetes flavor of Ingress Nginx, the Kubernetes managed distribution of it, whereas the GitLab operator currently, before this MR, deploys Nginx Inc.'s flavor of it. And so those actually behave differently. And so there's different configuration for those objects. And like I was starting to mention, there are no Red Hat certified images specifically for the Kubernetes Ingress Nginx Docker image. Hussein brought up a point as well that end users might not like that we bundle other services into our operator. So it's something to consider. We do currently do this with services like Redis and Postgres, but just like with the Helm charts, we plan to support external instances of those and just disabling our internal ones. And we can do the same thing for Nginx here. So the pros of this approach is that we get SSH support out of the box without any other manual user steps. It uses the same flavor, quote unquote, of Nginx that our Helm charts are using. And all our existing documentation on Nginx, as well as how to do external Nginx, would still apply because the values that we're supplying here are the same that we supply to the Helm chart. And so ultimate question is here, do we deploy these bundled and forked Nginx objects by default for users, or maybe not by default, but allow them to only if they want SSH? Or do we want to keep in with the operator paradigm and point users to installing the GitLab Nginx operator? So yeah, that's where I wanted to lead everyone. So any thoughts or questions or anything else you wanted me to demo?
What was the specific drawback to using the Nginx Ingress operator? I know it has the TCP server, I believe is what they call it, or transport server. That's it.
Yep.
There's a drawback to that. Can you touch that?
Sure. Yeah, those are custom resources specific to that operator, and those custom resources are marked in their documentation as a feature preview, not recommended for production. And sort of tangentially related, that configuring those doesn't automatically expose the desired port on the Nginx service. You have to go manually do that. Even the Nginx ingress controller custom resource doesn't have a field for exposing any custom ports.
I just want to get that one for everybody else who may not have that. That's the quick summary of, yes, the feature is there, but the UX on it is actually complex.
Yep, and like many operators, it's young, just like ours is, but they're much earlier in the development cycle than the related Helm chart, obviously.
So did we answer your two questions specifically? Do we deploy bundled forked Nginx objects from the GitLab chart by default, or do we allow the user to deploy them if they need SSH support?
Yeah, that's ultimately the question. Hussein has started to take a look, and so has Jason. So because we're getting near the end of the release cycle, I just wanted to open up the MR and make sure that this is an approach that we were all comfortable with and made sense. There's lots of ways to skin this cat. And so,
Gotcha.
Yeah, I think this kind of leads more into software philosophy and what we want our defaults to be and what we want to support, not necessarily is it technically feasible. I think we could go either way and it would still work. It's just if we do go the path of the Nginx ingress operator, we're just kind of going down a different track in terms of software we support, and the process for the end user would be a little tougher.
Yeah, that's the part that I think.
Yeah, they could still do it.
Really is bubbling at the top to me is like, it's already super complex for people to run this stuff. So if we can make SSH a no-brainer, that seems to be, that seems to be the heaviest item to tip to.
Yeah. So the biggest drawback that I actually see is within the OpenShift ecosystem is the lack of Red Hat certified images for the community controller. I don't know that there's a community operator that uses the same code base right now, personally. I wonder if it would make sense to reach out either to their team or for us to consider actually building it ourselves. Because if we could address the largest concern, would that be reasonable?
Yeah, it's a fair question. I noticed that, I'm just scrolling through here. I remember seeing that there was one of these images is effectively not made by the Nginx team, but it was made by someone who I guess was blessed to produce their image. I'll grab a link to it when I can find it. But I think This is definitely a valid concern, and if a user was constrained to OpenShift and this solution did not work for them, we could still document how to use the Nginx ingress operator and how to manually expose that port and how to configure the transport servers, etc. But since we are aiming to support both vanilla Kubernetes and OpenShift, if our default is our bundled Nginx, that might make sense, but still support users disabling our Nginx, which does work the same way in the Helm charts. You just set Nginx ingress enabled to false, and then they could still deploy the operator that we have in master today.
Right. Since you have that up, can you do me a favor and just actually do us, since we're searching by containers, can we search for the Nginx, the appropriately named container? So I don't remember if it's Nginx ingress controller or ingress Nginx controller.
Yeah, the correct, this would be the image for the operator itself, and then this would be the image that it uses when the controller starts. So this is the Nginx Inc. Kubernetes ingress code
Right.
base.
So I'm specifically looking for one that's not the Nginx Inc. one. What I'm saying is
Oh.
container by name. If we search for the same container name that is used in the public, does anything show up?
By the public, which one do you mean?
By the public image, the Kubernetes Nginx ingress. I can't
Oh,
remember
got
the name of the ingress controller's image.
Yeah, let me pull up. You're talking about, for example, the one that would be
Yeah.
deployed in the cluster right now.
Yeah, it looks like it's literally Nginx ingress Nginx / controller. So it just looks like it kind of sort of does a fuzzy match and points us there.
Yeah. Although this is the Nginx Inc. one.
Yeah. Okay. Well, there's Kong.
Yeah.
It doesn't. It just looks like there's no variation of the public one.
Right.
Okay. So the reason I point out, like, either reaching out to them and or consider building it ourselves is because to get a fully certified operator, we eventually need to use fully certified containers for all components of the deployment, which means there are some things out there now that we're using that we don't build a UBI image for. We either need to find public replacements that are near, if not identical, and or actually build public ones on UBI containers to be able to match that requirement. This would just be another one. And technically you have the ingress Nginx controller, but you also have the default deployment. And really the default deployment's entire job is to respond 404. So there's nothing that says we can't do that quite easily.
Right. I'm curious how the operator handles that, because I don't actually ever remember a default backend deployment running with the ingress operator, and there doesn't seem to be an image in here that's certified for that.
Yeah, I don't know how they choose to do it. I'd have to dig into how Nginx Inc. decided to actually implement that, specifically because, how do I phrase this? There are implementation differences on how they've chosen to do something versus how the community has chosen to do something. The community has chosen that you should be able to supply and or configure your own default backend. That allows you to bring your own error handler / secondary router, or literally just set, look, if you go to something on the ingress that doesn't actually end up at my application, just send it to my application.
Mm-hmm.
So they've put some flexibility in place that may not be in or may not be currently implemented, but planned as a part of the Nginx Inc. variation.
Right.
Fun challenges.
Yeah. It's like which YQ are you using? Cool. Any other thoughts or questions?
I'm hearing crickets.
Yeah, let's throw an item on the agenda for when we meet with Red Hat and just talk about it a little bit more, and we can share a link to this demo so they can understand kind of what we're trying to do. And then of course we can work asynchronously too, but I feel like this is one that we could add some context through a discussion and help them understand a little bit better.
Yeah, agreed. Awesome. Alrighty, well, thank you, everybody. The notes are here in the Google Doc. So with the crickets sounding, I will leave you all to enjoy the rest of your week. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, great work, Mitch. See ya.
Thank you.
Yeah, good job, Mitch.